Hey, composing gloves here, and today we're going to talk about low ratios. This is in a serial fashion. This is one of the most fundamental blocks. If you can understand this, you can understand high upper ratios, and things will start to come together here. This is one of the things that to me, started saying like, oh, maybe I can do FM when I understood a concept like this. So let's come over here. So a low ratio, it's just a really slow oscillation. And we're going to be dealing with specifically LFOs. But what's special about FM is it gives us the ability to send an LFO to modulate another LFO. And remember, with a sine wave, we're judging it on the rate of change that's going on here. So if we tell something to change, okay, let's say right now I've got a sine wave coming out, right? I'm going to take operator 2 and make it a 0.004 operator. So if I were to output operator 2, I get something that's so slow. I don't know if I can feel my speaker moving or not, but you can hear it click off. I get something that's so slow that you can't hear it. And I'm going to tell 1 to be modulated by this. So 1 being modulated by 2. You should be familiar with this from the Matrix video, so I'm not going to waste my time going through routing. We get something that we are very used to. So this is all great and dandy. Now, okay, what if I tell 2 to be modulated by 3? So we're modulating our modulator by another modulator, which is 3. And we're going to make 3 a low thing. Let's make it 0.004. Let's make it really slow. Well, what happens? Well, first, let's clarify something. So I can right click to turn things off. I'm going to output 2. So there's our 2, really slow signal. No shocker there. 3. Another really slow signal. Actually, the same really slow signal. So let's turn this back on. So 3 modulating 2, modulating 1, and then we're hearing 1. Let's see what that sounds like. Whoa, we get these fast and then slow and then fast. Well, let's do something else. Let's make 3 even slower. And we see that we get these sidebands in the middle. If I were to make... So at this point, things really start branching out. So what is going on here? First, let's try and understand the relationship between 2 and 3. So we understand that when 2's going on, we play a note saying change pitch, change pitch, change pitch pretty much the whole time. It's going back and forth continuously. Well, when we turn 3 on, it's also a sine wave. And so it's saying change pitch continuously as well. But now it's receiving instructions to change pitch a lot more on one part and a lot less on another part. This is really, really important, what we just established right here. So things will cascade at certain moments. And this means that if we could change the phase where this thing starts, if the phases are lined up, then they will behave differently because the rates of change will be registered at different times. So we'll modulate 2 differently, and as a result, 1 will be modulated differently. Hopefully you're getting this. This is really starting to layer the concepts on at this point. So 3 is receiving that constant change. So if we were to come in here, and I can actually change the phase in here if I so desire. I believe I can also change the phase with this as well. So let me go back to my oscillator tab. You see it changes things. Now we get these sidebands. So when we have our modulation index all the way up, what does that mean? Well, the amplitude, the volume is all the way up. When our volume's all the way up, we're going to get more sidebands. And that's the big takeaway from this. We're going to get more sidebands. And because we get more sidebands, we're going to get a bigger, more timbral content to work with. That might not always be a great thing. In fact, you're going to want to dial back sometimes. So we'll bring it down. And you notice that we don't get near the speed up and slow down because the changes that add up and are reduced aren't as great. And so that's so if we turn it up, so if we turn all the way up, we get our maximum change. Now, if we modulate our sine wave by a triangle wave, we get that teleporting thing. But we're still getting the sine wave modulation feedback. So we still get a movement, but this is telling the movement of this one, of the sine wave. Modulator 3 is telling modulator 2, to change more dramatically. Now, if we take 2 and make it a triangle wave, we get some really interesting things going on. If I change the index, So these are elementary responses that we just need to add to our sonic vocabulary. Now, what happens if I add a third? So let's change these back to sine waves. So as you can see, we can change our shape here, and based on what we talked about earlier, we can come up with some pretty specific shapes that we want to try and accomplish, and we can add those results to sort of our brain, so that when we want to make a particular sound, we can have, a bunch of things to reference in our head and say, hey, that sounds like that, and we can go over and make that. So what if we turn 4 on and make it? So I'm going to modulate 4 by 3. So 4 is modulating 3, 3 is modulating 2, 2 is modulating 1, and 1 is being heard. So if we turn 4 on and we're going to turn it on to a 0.0001, what will happen to our sound? Well, based on previous guesses, we're going to get 2 builds up. And so what that means is we're going to have one really big build up. It's going to build really big for a second and then come down, because our rates of change are going to add and subtract. They're going to cascade on each other. So if we play this, oh my, guess what? We were right. And we get more sidebands because there's more modulation happening. So if we turn our 4 down, we can get those some of those extra sidebands. We could take 4, we could turn 3 down. Well, what happens when you take 4 and 3 but then modulate that? Well, it's the same thing as taking 2 and 3. And okay. So 4 is telling 3 to change its pitch at such and such a rate, but 3 is only going to be so loud. So we're in a sense, we're giving ourselves more bands, but there's going to be less bands because the modulation index isn't that great. I know I just said two things that seem to just kind of contradict themselves, but if we play this, we can see that our bands pretty much aren't there, but in theory they are there. So when we modulate 3, that's the important part. When we move 3, we'll have more bands. So this is now we've reached a point where moving particular knobs for a sound could be important to us. This is very important. And when we start getting into envelopes and things, picking which knob we want may play a big role in the way our sound comes out. So we want to be aware of that. So that's really interesting. Now let's talk about some other choices we have here. Here, I can also, make this a triangle wave. So I can have a sine wave modulate a triangle wave, which we get 2 steady states of timbre now that we're shifting between. And so if we take 3 and increase that, we get those 2 states now are oscillating so fast that they become one state, creating a new state. So you see, we are starting to get quite complicated here. So I'm going to bring it back. So that's pretty manageable. And so let's hear what a triangle wave sounds like modulated by a saw wave. And so that's an interesting relationship right there. We get our 2 peaks very clearly, but we still get the wish from the sine wave. So when we add a sine wave modulating a triangle wave, so let's hear that real fast because that's the relationship we've set up. So we'll make this a sine wave and this a triangle wave. We're just getting all sorts of weird results, right? So that's another really interesting relationship. And as we get higher up, it gets faster because it's based on a ratio, remember. So if we go down low, I always picture like a really big, fat, dumb guy when I play low notes FM like that. I don't know why. So anyways, that's a really interesting relationship. So understanding that we're getting our 2 points, but we're still getting the slide from the FM. And the order that they're FM in plays quite a role in what we're doing. So that could be the difference. And just by switching these 2 orders, we have a totally different outcome. And so that's something that you need to be aware of when you're making sound design. I personally think this is cool. And then we could take 4 and modulate that, and we could set up another one of these. So triangle modulated, a sine wave modulating a triangle. We could set this up to be another triangle. And we could take the sweeps from the sine wave and modulate it. We'll use 5, and we'll make 5 a low ratio. Now we're starting to get some pretty crazy sound. Did I leave something up high? No, I guess it's just they've stacked up so much now that it squares itself. It's exponential the more we do this. So I'm going to dial back 5. Because we're now our modulation indexes are adding up. This is when I said at the beginning it's serial, because 1's going into 1, going into 1, going into 1, and then coming out. So it's serial. These things are adding. So we don't necessarily want this much modulation index. Again, just think of modulation index as just more sidebands. There are other ways of thinking about it that are the more technically correct ways on like the coefficients you're multiplying things by, and technically there's always an infinite number of sidebands, but the thing about modulation index is the smaller it is, sure there's those infinite bands, but they're so quiet that it doesn't matter. So the bigger it is though, we get a lot more sidebands a lot faster. So if we reverse this relationship over here, it's now being sent. So we get the relationship that we had here, but now it's being duplicated over here. We start getting these all sorts of things. Now we haven't even done, we could go back here and we could just make this like a saw wave. And we can make this a triangle wave. Just really interesting. In between, we get a mix of the two, and that's when things start. This is one of the powers of citrus. So you can see we have like just off low ratios alone, we have just this obscene amount. It's just stupid what we've got. So this is stuff that's more appropriate. I've opened the door for you. I've shown you some of the possibilities. We haven't even talked about things like changing parameters in operators while they're moving. We've just FM stuff by static oscillators. And we haven't even messed with DC offset, which again offers us more capabilities that I'm going to let you infer from these sorts of things. Sound design width is a more appropriate thing for getting into the sound design of this. I want to show you the technical aspects on why things are doing, and we're building a sonic vocabulary to an extent, because a lot of this is just going to be up to you to mess with. But I want you to be able to think ahead. When I say sonic vocabulary, I guess I mean that's for the sound designs with, but I want you to be able to think ahead on what your signal will behave like. And hopefully you're getting to see that. So that's low ratios in a nutshell. One of the very useful tools I find in my toolkit as far as being able to know what probably is going to happen and knowing what happens when I add a bunch more together. So now you are armed with that knowledge. I encourage you to experiment and do as much of this crap as you can on your own time and just get really familiar and cozy with those ideas. Next up, we're going to talk about parallel things happening in parallel. So if you have any questions, let me know, subscribe, and have a blessed day.
Opposing gloves. Reversing.